some of you are sinking. And listen to the words that David wrote. David was a poet. In 2 Samuel 22, 5 through 7, he says this: "The waves of death overwhelmed me. The floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me, and death laid a trap in my path." And so he takes his torment and he turns it into poetry. He turns it into a song. And he says, the waves of death, they overwhelmed me. Floods of destruction, they swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. But in my distress, I cried out to the Lord. Yes, I cried out to God for help. Why? Because even the toughest warrior fights battles he can't win. My cry reached his ears. And he reached down from heaven, and he rescued me, and he drew me out of the deep waters. Here's the good news. No matter how deep you are, no matter how far you've sunk, God can still reach you. You got to cry out. You got to call out. You got to say, God, save me. God, save me. God, I need you. If the waves are overwhelming you, if the storm is too big, I want to remind you what Psalms 89:9 says. It says, you rule the oceans. It's not you, it's God rules the oceans. Your God, my God, is bigger than our storms. He's bigger, he's greater, he is grander. It says, you rule the oceans. You subdue their storm-tossed waves. You do, God, you do.
Maybe you're in a storm. You didn't plan on it. It was completely unexpected. But you're in the middle of it, and you're wondering if you'll survive. Could be a physical storm. Maybe it's a relational storm with your spouse, your kids, your parents, or a friend. Maybe your financial boat is getting rocked by heavy waves. You're sinking deeper and deeper in debt and wondering if you'll ever be able to get your head above water again. Maybe it's an emotional storm. For you, the storm is internal. You're fighting a battle no one else can see. With depression, anxiety, or fear, you're in a storm. In Matthew chapter 8, the disciples found themselves in a literal storm on the Sea of Galilee. We pick it up in verse 23. Then Jesus got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, before we even really start the story, I have to share with you an important fact. The disciples followed Jesus into that boat. If you go back to verse 18, you read this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. It was Jesus' plan. It was Jesus' idea to be in that boat, on that sea, at that time. This may be the most important thing you learn today. Storms come even when you're following Jesus. If you're in a storm and you're wondering where you went wrong, I want to encourage you, this storm doesn't necessarily mean you've missed God. Some storms are of your own making. But often, storms come even though you're following Jesus.
Being a Christian never exempts you from a storm. Don't think that because you have a tough time, you're disobeying God. The disciples got in this storm because they obeyed God. Jesus said, get in the boat. They got in the boat and sailed right into a storm. They were right in the center of God's will, but in the middle of a storm. So when you're going through a tough time, do not automatically assume I must be out of the will of God, because you might be exactly where God wants you to be. Storms are impartial.
These disciples were not out of the will of God. Why were they in a storm? They were in a storm, don't miss this, they were in a storm because they were in the will of God. It was Jesus that constrained them to get into that boat. They were in this storm because they were obeying Jesus. Why would Jesus want them to be in a storm? Because he wanted them to grow. I want to ask you a question. Those of you who've been on the trail for a while, When did you grow the most? When everything was fine? When you were smoothly sailing? Or when the storm came?
And sometimes God allows very difficult situations in life to do what? To grow us up. And I think that if God allows a storm in your life, that its ultimate purpose is to bring you out stronger.
You will learn things in storms that you will never learn any other way.
A calm sea never produced a good sailor. How would you like to go on the seas with a sailor who had never been on troubled seas? If you're going to have a good life, it means you're going to go through stuff. But the purpose of that stuff isn't to harm you. God allows it or causes it to grow you up, to grow me up.
And the lesson is that Jesus can be trusted in the storms of life. And the only way you're ever going to prove that true is to go through them. That's it. If you've never had a problem, you'd never know God could solve them.
It's God who is the master of the winds and the waves, and He's the one who causes storms to come. It is a shallow theology, a very shallow theology that says if we're in the will of God, that we're just going to sail always smoothly on the sea of life.
But unfortunately, what I've learned is I don't grow really well when my flight is smooth. The times in my life that I have grown the most have been through the most violent turbulence. Things that I never would have picked, things that I never would have selected, things that I never would have asked for. Because when things were great, I was all about myself. But when I was overwhelmed, it was an opportunity to call out to God.
Find it very interesting that Jesus told him to get into a boat knowing the boat would go into a storm. He's God. He knew everything that would happen. There's a reason in it. There's something behind it. Christians aren't exempt from storms, but they are exempt from storms with no purpose. So if you feel like you're in the middle of one right now, I want you to know there's a purpose behind it. There's some reason behind it, because I actually believe it is storms are really the fitness, the spiritual fitness strategy of the believer. God's desire for your life is to make you strong in your faith. Those mountaintop moments, they're good for us, but they're not the thing that makes us stronger. It's those dark kind of moments in the storm that'll strengthen us to be who God's called us to be. Spurgeon says it this way: storms help to make the sailors sturdy, and trials help to make Christians strong in their faith. I want you strong in your faith.
You know what's cool in the middle of the storms of life? You don't hear a lot of stories about the disciples crossing the Galilee Sea with, it was a sunny day, the water was great, they were skiing. You don't hear about that story too often. You only hear about the storms, right? Because in the storms, in those hard moments, are the moments where you get to grow a little bit closer, grow a little bit deeper, and learn a little bit more about the Lord. He does things in the valley that can only be explained through Him. He creates mountaintop moments in the middle of the valley. Are you with me? And some of you, I'm not saying you should go chasing storms. I'm just telling you there is great joy and great reward even in the middle of the struggle. I just want to encourage you. I tell you today, I know the wilderness is a long way. The wilderness is hard. I'm just telling you, the Lord has great plans on the other side.
The disciples didn't expect the storm, but now this group, several of them, by the way, expert fishermen, were fighting for their lives as the waves threatened to sink their boat. The disciples thought they weren't going to make it. Jesus was so disturbed by the storm that he was taking a nap. Well, the disciples panicked. Jesus slept. Here's why that's so encouraging. It lets you know Jesus isn't intimidated by your storm. To you, it seems impossible, unending, devastating. Jesus, on the other hand, isn't frightened by it in the least.
So I wrote it down this way, okay? When it comes to your life, when it comes to the storm, ready? You can freak out. Only if Jesus is freaking out. You can stress if Jesus is stressed about your issue. You can panic all you want. as long as Jesus is panicking. But if he's staying calm and restful and at peace in this moment, then I want you to know that's what we're called to live as believers also.
They shifted their attention from the winds and the waves and the storm to Jesus. They recognized we can't handle this by ourselves. There's nothing we can do. We better wake up Jesus. When storms come, never forget, Jesus is in the boat with you. Jesus is in your boat.
I'm praying that as the storm rages around you, that there's peace within your soul because Jesus is on your boat. Verse 25, look what it says. So the disciples went and woke him and said, Lord, save us. And haven't we all done the same thing? Haven't we all had this moment where we go, I'm going to solve this problem, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to make it better, and God's saying, the storm's raging around you, just turn to me and ask me for some help. I can help get you through this.
You need to learn how to always locate where Jesus is in the storm. They didn't start looking for Jesus until they realized that they couldn't bail out enough water. It's human nature when a storm starts to rage to instantly try to fix it. I have to learn instantly when I feel that storm coming in, where's Jesus in this?
Well, friend, maybe you're in a storm right now, like the disciples in this boat. Here's my question. Who's in the boat with you? It's Jesus. He's in our boat. He's in our life. And we would do well to remember who He is and what He can do. He still quiets storms, and He can quiet the heart of His child in the middle of a storm.
If you're going through a storm, the first lesson you got to learn is God is always with you if you're a believer. There will be nothing I will face or you the rest of our life alone. Jesus is in my boat. He's in there. He's in my life and in my boat. And if you're a believer, He's in your boat too. God promises every believer, lo, I am with you always. I will never leave you or forsake you. Isaiah 43, verse 1 and 2. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. What a promise. If your boat's rocking, don't worry. If you're a believer, Jesus is in your boat. So remember God's closeness. He's still with you.
God's answer for every problem the world has ever faced has always been His presence.
I understand you're in a storm, but you don't have to face that storm alone. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. The one who created this world and the one who overcame death is in your boat. You don't have to fear the storm because Jesus is in your boat. I don't know how people face the storms of life without Jesus. Mark, in his telling the story, gives us Jesus' words. Jesus stood up in the boat. He arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. There are a lot of wind and waves around us. None of that knocks Jesus out of the boat. None of that intimidates Him. In the middle of it all, in spite of it all, you can turn to Jesus, and with just 3 words, peace, be still, Jesus can calm your storm. Jesus is not intimidated. He's not afraid. He's with you. He's in the boat. He can and will speak peace to you, even in the middle of your most terrifying storm.
Jesus expects you to trust Him in the storm. Regardless of your storm, Jesus is your solution. Jesus promises to bring you through your storm. Look at verse 35. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go to the other side."
The disciples should have really believed Jesus when he said, let's cross over to the other side. Jesus didn't say, let's hop in the boat and see what happens. He said, let's cross over to the other side. And if he said, let's cross over to the other side, guess where Jesus was planning on going? To the other side. The only problem is when the storm came up, the disciples were so struck with fear that it wiped their memory of what he actually said, and they thought he must not have seen this cancer coming. He must not have seen this contention coming. He may not have seen this. No. This is what the Bible says. In Numbers chapter 23, verse 19, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. As he said, will he not do? Or as he's spoken, will he not make it good? You can take it to the bank. If he said it, he's going to do it. And in the midst of a storm is the most important time for us to remember, wait, what did he actually say about this? You will make it to the other side. Because what guarantees your success is not your tenacity, not your strength, not your culture. It's who's in the boat with you.
Jesus didn't tell them it'd be an easy trip. He didn't say they wouldn't get wet. He didn't say they wouldn't have an attack or be scared. He just says, we are going to the other side. And they did. You're going to make it. We're going to make it. And notice what Jesus said to the disciples in verse 26. You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Now that tells me two things. The root of their problem was fear, and the solution to their problem is faith. The greatest threat to the lives of the disciples was not the storm. It was their unbelief. The secret of victory over fear is faith. And even if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. So you don't have to have super faith. You just have to have that little bit of faith in a great big God. That's the issue. See, everybody's got faith, but you don't have to have a bunch. You can put a little faith in a big God and get big results.
Jesus can use our little faith. Some of y'all are waiting to get great faith to do great things from God. And I want you to know, big miracles are the result of little faith in your life. Jesus says it this way in Matthew chapter 17, very truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, because nothing will be impossible to you. That's for us as believers. Nothing is impossible. So I want you to know, you don't have to have great faith to experience great things from God. It starts with little faith to just say, in the middle of this trial, in the middle of this battle, in the middle of the storm, God, I'm going to turn to you.
God can handle it. God's bigger than your storm.
With God, his way is rarely the easy way. But he's got you. And that means you've got this. If God is for you, no storm can stand against you.
I don't have to have the answer. I just know who does. I don't know. I know enough history to know he'll bring me through. I don't know how. I can't see it, but I know he'll bring me through. And so there's only one thing that can calm your storm, and that's Jesus. But you got to get him in your boat. You got to get him in your life. You got to have Jesus in your life to make it through the storms of life.
But listen to me carefully. Whenever you are in a storm, Jesus knows about it. He's close by, and he's waiting for you to ask for help. I'll never leave you nor forsake you is his promise. Think about that. Jesus has said to every one of us who are his children, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
You aren't alone. You aren't alone. We do not walk this road alone. That's why we can say with confidence, you'll survive this storm. You will. Because you're not alone. You belong to God.